All right. So we are starting, I was just telling Santosha, we're starting book 3, discourse 24
Yes.
on the descent or avatarana of Lord Kapila. I remember someone when we were early in this group was asking about when it mentioned a bunch of avatars of Vishnu besides the Dashavatar. Um, since the Dashavatar is kind of the ones that everybody knows, but there are a lot more, and this is going into detail about one of the other ones. So
There are so many avataram, right?
oh yeah,
Like,
there's
um,
more than 30 are listed in the Bhagavatam, and in various places it says that Vishnu has an infinite number of avatars. The Dashavatar is just kind of a list of popular ones for people to worship.
exactly.
Um, so Maitreya resumed, the sage Maitreya narrating this to Vidura. This is coming after we just heard about the relationship of Devahuti and her husband Kardama, and they had 9 daughters. And in accordance with the terms of their marriage, he is soon going to leave her and go take sannyas in the wander in the wilderness for the rest of his life. And he has fulfilled all the terms of their agreement, but she's asking if he will give her a son in addition to her 9 daughters. So when Devahuti, the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, who was worthy of all praise, spoke such words full of dispassion, the merciful sage recalled the words of Lord Vishnu and replied, "Worry not about yourself, O princess of irreproachable conduct. The immortal Lord will enter your womb at no distant date. You have undertaken sacred vows, God bless you. Hence do you adore the Lord with reverence through control of the senses and religious observances, as well as through austere penance and charitable gifts of money. Propitiated by you, Lord Vishnu will be born as a son to you, thereby spreading my renown too, and will cut the knot of ignorance existing in your heart by instructing you in the knowledge of the Spirit." Maitreya went on, reposing full faith in the message of the Prajapati Kardama, out of great regard for him, Devahuti too betook herself to the worship of the immutable Supreme Person as the preceptor of the world. I suspect preceptor of the world is translating Jagadguru. It's a common title of Krishna. After a pretty long time, Lord Madhusudhana, is what it calls him here, that's the name of Vishnu, manifested himself first through the generative fluid of Kardama and then through Devahuti, even as fire appears through firewood. At the time of his descent on earth, gods in the form of raining clouds sounded musical instruments in the sky. The Gandharvas sang praises to him while Apsaras danced through joy. Heavenly flowers rained by the gods flying in the air dropped, and all the quarters as well as the waters and the minds of the people too became clear. Brahma the self-born went along with Marichi and the other sages to that hermitage of Kardama surrounded by the river Sarasvati, since it was on an island in the Sarasvati River and kind of by a lake within the flow of the Sarasvati River, called Bindu Sarovara. Brahma, who is naturally possessed of true wisdom, already knew that the Lord, who is no other than the Supreme Brahma, had descended through pure sattva for imparting the knowledge of the Sankhya system of philosophy, O vanquisher of foes. Welcoming with a guileless mind the intention of the Lord, the Creator spoke thus to Kardama and Devahuti, with all his senses greatly delighted. Brahma said, "You have truly worshipped me, dear son, in that you reverently carried out my behest, O respecter. This is the service that ought to be rendered by the sons to their father, that they should bow to the command of their father with due deference, saying, 'Very well. These slender-waisted daughters of yours, my worthy child, will multiply this creation manifold through their descendants. Therefore give away your daughters this very day to the foremost of the sages with due regard to the girl's temperament and liking, and thereby spread your fame all over the globe. I know the most ancient person, the Adipurusha, the bestower of all boons on living beings, has descended through his own Maya in the person of Kapila, O Kardama." Turning to Devahuti, he said, "With golden hair, lotus-like eyes, and lotus feet, whose souls bear the mark of a lotus, the soles of his feet bear the mark of a lotus. It is Lord Vishnu. The name he used was the slayer of the demon Kaitabha, who has been born of you, O daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, to tear up the roots of karma through the instrumentality of Shastriya knowledge and realization. Having cut the knot of ignorance and misapprehension, he will roam about the earth. He will be the lord of the Siddhas, held in great esteem by the teachers of the Sankhya system of philosophy. He will be known all over the world by the name of Kapila and will spread your fame. Maitreya continued, having thus reassured the couple, Brahma, the creator of the universe, rode on his mount, the swan, and returned to Satyaloka, along with Sanaka and his three brothers, and accompanied by Narada. After the departure of Brahma, O Vidura, the sage Kardama immediately gave away his daughters to the Prajapatis, the lords of created beings, as directed by the Creator, according to the injunctions of the Shastras. He gave his daughter Kala to Marichi, and Anasuya to Atri. Sraddha he gave away to Angira, and Havirbhu to Pulastya. He further gave Gati, who was worthy of Pulaha, to the latter, and the virtuous Kriya to Kratu, Khyati to Bhrigu, and even so Arundhati to Vasishta. And to Atharva he gave Shanti, through whom a sacrifice is successfully accomplished. When they were duly married, Kardama propitiated these foremost sages as well as their wives. Being thus married, the sages thereupon took leave of Kardama and departed, full of joy, each for his own hermitage. Atharva, the Prajapati Atharva, by the way, is the namesake of the Atharva Veda. He was there were a couple of rishis who cognized it, but he was the main one, and so it was named after him. Oh, I see somebody had a question. Where are we? Yes, we are in book 3, discourse 24, Sunil. We just started that today, so we're shortly into discourse. I'm pretty sure it's 24. Having come to know that it was Lord Vishnu himself who is possessed of 3 pairs of divine attributes, power and affluence, piety and renown, wisdom and dispassion, each to infinite extent, the foremost of the gods, who had been born as his son, the sage, Kardama, approached him when he was all alone, and bowing to him said, Alas, on those who are burning in this hell of transmigration, or samsara, as a result of their own evil deeds, the gods shower their grace after a long time. Contrary to this, the Lord, whose truth-striving souls seek to realize in lonely places through concentrated practice of devotion, matured through many lives, and who promotes the cause of his devotees, has this time appeared in the house of sensual men like us, not minding the ignominy incident to such a birth. Intent on enhancing the dignity of his devotees, you have been born into my house just to redeem your pledge and to found the Sankhya system. O Lord, your transcendent forms alone are worthy of you. Even so, the human semblances that appeal to your own devotees are as well liked by you, even though you are devoid of a material form. I take refuge in you, whose footstool is always fit to be saluted by sages keen to know the truth, and who are perfect in power and energy, wisdom and dispassion, fame and affluence. Those 6 attributes are kind of a Vedic expression forming the definition of Bhagavan, or Bhagavati, the one who possesses those 6 attributes, all to an infinite degree. I take refuge in Kapila, the Supreme Lord, who has all the potencies at his beck and call, who appears as primordial matter, the spirit, the Mahatattva, the time spirit, the threefold ego, the guna, the ego in the form of the 3 gunas, and the various spheres as well as their guardians, and then reabsorbs all these phenomena into himself by virtue of his energy in the form of consciousness, and who is the all-witnessing seer. Acquitted of the debt I owed to my father, and having gained all my desires through you, I now take leave of you, the Lord of all created beings. Treading the path of recluses, I would roam, free from sorrow, contemplating on you in my heart. The Lord replied, whatever I say is an authority to the world, in matters secular as well as sacred. Therefore, it is only to redeem what I said to you that I have been born as your son, O sage. My present birth in this world is meant only for expounding the true nature of the categories, so helpful in self-realization to those seeking release from their subtle body. This mysterious path of self-knowledge has been obscured through long ages. Know that this personality has been assumed by me in order to revive that path. Allowed by me, go wherever you like, and conquering death, which is exceedingly difficult to conquer, through actions dedicated to me, adore me with a view to attaining immortality. Beholding me, the supreme self-effulgent spirit dwelling in the heart of all beings, in your own heart, through your intellect, you will be freed from all sorrow and attain the fearless state. To my mother, as well, I shall impart that spiritual knowledge, which frees one from the bondage of all actions, and by virtue of which she will get over the fear of transmigration and attain supreme joy. Maitreya resumed. Thus addressed by the celebrated Kapila, Prajapati Karadama, went round the Lord in parikrama, and straightway withdrew to the forest full of joy. Observing a vow of non-violence practiced by hermits, and exclusively depending on Sri Hari, the Supreme Spirit, the sage renounced the sacrificial fire as well as a permanent dwelling, and roamed about the globe free from attachment. He fixed his mind on the infinite Brahman, who is beyond both cause and effect, who, though devoid of the three gunas, yet brings them to light, and who had been realized through exclusive devotion. Free from egotism and the sense of mineness, indifferent to pairs of opposites like heat and cold, pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, etc., and viewing all with the same eye, Karadama perceived his own self everywhere, meaning he perceived everything as his own self. His mind had turned inward and was perfectly composed, and the self-possessed sage looked like an ocean without waves. His mind being fixed through supreme devotion on the all-knowing Lord Vasudeva, the self or inner controller of all embodied souls, he was now free from the bondage of ignorance. He perceived the Lord, his own self, as present in all living beings, and all living beings in the Lord, his own self. In this way, Karadama, who had no desire and was free from malice, who was even-minded towards all, and who had developed devotion to the Lord, attained union with him. Thus ends the 24th discourse, forming part of the story of Lord Kapila in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 25, Lord Kapila expatiates on the glory of devotion in response to the query of Mother Devahuti. Shaunaka said, so we're zooming out one narrator further out. Kapila, who expounded the true nature of the fundamental principles, was no other than the birthless Lord Narayana, descended of his own free will and through his own Maya, in order to teach humanity the truth of the self. Although I have often heard the stories of the Lord, my senses are not sated with hearing the glory of Lord Kapila, the best of all men and the foremost of all yogis. Having assumed by his own Maya a personality conforming to the will of his devotees, whatever the Lord does is all worth singing. Therefore, kindly narrate all those doings to me, full of reverence as I am. Sutta said, urged in this way to expound the true nature of the fundamental principles, the worshipful Maitreya, who had been urged by Vidura to do so, the worshipful Maitreya, a friend of the sage Dvaipayana Veda Vyasa, addressed Vidura as follows according to the spirit of his inquiry. Maitreya said, when Karadama, Lord Kapila's father, had left for the forest, Lord Kapila stayed on the strand of the same Bindu Sarovara, in the ashram on the island within the lake that was in the current of the Saraswati River, in order to please his mother. When Kapila, who was capable of showing to her the culmination of the fundamental principles, sat at leisure, Devahuti recalled the words of Brahma and spoke to him. Devahuti said, I am awfully sick of the craving of my wicked senses, O perfect one. It is because of my unremitting efforts to gratify this craving that I have fallen into the deep abyss of ignorance, O Lord. In this present birth, which I am sure is going to be the last of a long series, she says, because she has an avatar as her child. That's a fairly good sign that that's probably going to be your last birth. I have now, by your grace, secured in you an excellent eye to enable me to see through this thick veil of darkness which is so difficult to penetrate. You are no other than the Lord, the most ancient person and the ruler of all embodied souls, who has appeared, like the sun, as an eye to the world blinded by ignorance. Now be pleased, my Lord, to dispel my great delusion, for the feeling of I-ness with reference to the body and that of mindness in respect of all that is connected with it have been inspired by you. For ascertaining the true nature of Prakriti and Purusha, I have sought refuge in you, who afford protection to all and are a veritable axe to the tree of metempsychosis in the case of your devotees. Metempsychosis is essentially reincarnation, the cycle of samsara and the transmigration of souls. I bow to you, the foremost of those knowing the secret of true religion. Maitreya continued. On hearing of his mother's innocent desire, which was calculated to stimulate in men the longing for liberation, the Lord, who is the goal of noble souls that have subdued their self, mentally approved of it, and spoke as follows, his countenance beaming with a gentle smile. The Lord said, in my opinion, the only means to final beatitude is yoga in the form of contemplation on the Supreme Spirit, which is characterized by absolute cessation of both joy and sorrow. I shall now explain to you that very yoga, which is perfect in every limb, and which I taught of yore to sages who were keen to hear it, or hear of it, O virtuous lady. Mind alone is held responsible for the bondage and emancipation of the soul. Attached to the objects of senses, it leads to bondage. When, however, it develops affinity to the Supreme Person, it brings liberation to the soul. When the mind is purged of its impurities in the form of lust, greed, etc., which have their root in the sense of I-ness and mindness, and it becomes pure, it grows indifferent to pleasure and pain and gets equipoised. With a mind equipped with true knowledge and dispassion, as well as with devotion, the jiva then perceives the self as one, undifferentiated, self-effulgent, subtle, indivisible, unattached, and beyond prakriti. And prakriti is reduced in strength by comparison. For striving souls, there is no blissful road to God realization like devotion directed towards the Lord, who is the soul of the universe. The wise consider attachment as an unyielding fetter for the soul. The same attachment, however, serves as an open door to liberation when it is directed towards saints. Saints are forbearing, compassionate, and composed. They are friendly to all living beings and inimical to none, and follow the injunctions of the Shastras. Their good disposition itself serves as an ornament to them, with an meaning that they need no other ornaments. Their good disposition itself is their ornament. With an undivided heart, they practice unflinching devotion to me, and for my sake, they abandon even their obligatory duties and forsake their kinsmen and relatives. Nay, they listen to and narrate delightful stories relating to me, their mind ever set on me. Afflictions of various kinds, therefore, never torment such people. Such are holy men, free from all attachment, O virtuous lady. Attachment to such holy men must be sought for by you, for they counteract the pernicious effects of attachment. Through the fellowship of saints, one gets to hear my stories, leading to a correct and full knowledge of my glory, and pleasing to the heart as well as to the ear. By hearing such stories, one is sure to develop, one after another, reverence and fondness for and devotion to the Lord, whose realization is preceded by the cessation of ignorance. Developing distaste for the pleasures of sense belonging to this world as well as to the next, through devotion engendered by contemplation on my pastimes connected with the creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe, the man who enjoys the fellowship of saints will diligently and devoutly strive to subdue his mind through easy processes of yoga. Through renunciation of the material objects of sense, through wisdom supplemented by dispassion, through yoga, and through devotion directed towards me, man attains to me, the self of all embodied souls, in that very life. Devahuti said, what kind of devotion is worth developing towards you? And what is the type fit to be practiced by me, through which I may easily and immediately attain to your being, a synonym for liberation? What is the character of the yoga referred to by you, O embodiment of supreme bliss, as a direct means to God perception, like an arrow which goes straight to its target, as well as to the realization of truth? And how many are the processes supplementary to the same? Kindly explain all this to me, like how many steps are there to whatever practice of yoga you are recommending? Kindly explain all this to me in such a way that I, a dull-witted woman, O Hari, may understand the difficult process with ease by your grace. Maitreya resumed. Having thus learnt the object of his mother through whom he had appeared in a human semblance, Lord Kapila was filled with affection for her and expounded the system of philosophy which teaches the fundamental principles, which they call Sankhya, as well as the elaborate course of devotion and yoga. The Lord said, motiveless devotion to the Lord may be defined as the natural inclination towards the Lord, who is an embodiment of sattva, of the senses of a man of undivided mind, which are the only means, the senses, are the only means of perceiving the objects, as well as of his organs of action, which are engaged in activities enjoined by the Vedas. Devotion is superior to final beatitude itself, and that it speedily dissolves the subtle body, even as the gastric fire digests the food that is devoured. Some devotees of the Lord, meaning it, the subtle body essentially being a construct made of karmas and of avidya, that such devotion will kind of unravel it, unravel the sukshma sharira, and kind of shed off the koshas that cover the Atman. Some devotees of the Lord, who ever delight in the service of my feet and are engaged in activities only for my sake, and who lovingly sing to one another of my exploits alone, crave not even for absorption into my being. The aforesaid saints, O Mother, behold my charming and divine forms, possessed of a smiling face and ruddy eyes, forms which confer boons on them, and have talks with them, which are the envy even of the greatest sages. Their devotion secures to them a place in my subtle abode, even though they never seek it. Their mind and senses fascinated by those forms with attractive limbs, captivating playful gestures, glances accompanied with a smile and delightful speech. They no longer crave for the wealth and enjoyments of Satyaloka and the other spheres falling within my jurisdiction as the Lord of Maya, nor for the Ashtasiddhis, the 8 kinds of supernatural powers, that come to them of their own accord as a sequel to devotion, nor even for the wealth and splendor of the Lord's own realm, Vaikuntha, which are full in every respect. Yet they do enjoy these in that abode of the Supreme. So even though they have no desire for those things, they do get those things. They who depend on me, nay, to whom I am the only object of love, nay, the very self, the son, the friend, the preceptor, the kith and kin, and the chosen deity, the Ishta Devata, are never deprived of these enjoyments in Vaikuntha, nor does my weapon in the shape of time ever devour them. I take them once, in other words, that they will enjoy this forever. I take them once for all to the other side of death, who worship me with exclusive devotion in the aforesaid manner, realizing my presence in every quarter and renouncing this world and the next, nay, even their own conditioned self, which wanders through both worlds. And all those who are connected with the same here, in other words, their attachments to their other loved ones, as well as wealth, cattle, houses, and everything else. The terrible fear of birth and death can never be got rid of by resorting to anyone other than myself. The Almighty Lord, the ruler of both Prakriti and Purusha, the self of all living beings. It is through fear of me that the wind blows. It is through fear of me that the sun shines. It is through fear of me that Indra sends forth showers, fire burns, and death goes about. Saying through fear here is it's essentially in the context of saying that the fear of birth and death that drives creatures on, saying that even the devas, even the Trayastrinchata devas of Indra, are driven by a sense of impermanence, the the time spirit within Maya that makes them feel that they have to maintain their position, that makes them feel like to maintain their pleasure and avoid pain, they have to keep swimming, so to speak. For lasting happiness, the yogis betake themselves through the practice of devotion, accompanied by spiritual knowledge and dispassion, to my feet, which are free from fear. A mind fixed on me through the intense practice of devotion and steadied thereby. That is the only means for men in this world to attain final beatitude. Thus ends the 25th discourse, forming part of the story of Lord Kapila in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 26, on the process of evolution of the Mahatattva and the other fundamental principles. This is where we really get into Sankhya philosophy. The Lord continued. Yeah, so a little bit more about that. On the Devas fearing for death and birth. The Devas, like he was talking about the wind, the sun, the rain, these are Devas like Vayu, Vivasvan, Indra. They do fear for death and birth. They have and do experience things like anxiety. They don't live forever, those Devas, the Trayastrinshata Devas of Indra and the rest of the 33 Deva lords who follow. He's one of the 33, so the other 32 Deva lords who follow him, and then their underlings below them. Their lifespan is huge. They live for a Manvantara, which is a huge span of time, millions and millions of years, but it is finite. They are great beings, far superior to humans, or at least the vast majority of humans, anyone other than like a Jivan Mukta. But they are, they do have ignorance in them. They can suffer. They can experience pain and suffering. And because they have this sense that their immense heavenly pleasures, which they do enjoy, are temporary, even if the end is millions of years off, they always kind of feel this impulse, even if they forget it for long spans of time. There is an impulse in them that, like, to maintain their pleasure is going to require work, that they can't just relax and know that it's going to be there forever, and this makes them susceptible to anxiety and susceptible to suffering, still self-caused mental and spiritual suffering. They are not fully realized beings. They're great beings. The Vedas have all sorts of yajnas and prayers to them because they operate the forces of nature, and it's absolutely appropriate to worship them, to perform yajnas to them, to make offerings to them for certain purposes. But the full freedom from ignorance that comes from a stable resting in one's consciousness being absolutely established in the self or in Bhagavan, which are synonyms, just thought of by different paths, has not fully been realized by the Trayastrinshata Devas. Radha, if you're asking for where this is sharing on Facebook, I believe it's just under my name on Facebook. Let's see. The Lord continued. Now I shall tell you, one by one, the distinctive features of the different categories, by knowing which a man is freed once for all from the modes of Prakriti. I shall explain to you the nature of knowledge in the form of self-realization, which, by cutting the knot of egotism existing in the heart, leads the jiva to final beatitude. So declare the wise. The Purusha is no other than the spirit, who is beginningless, devoid of attributes, existing beyond Prakriti, revealed in the heart and self-effulgent, nay, pervaded by whom the universe presents itself to our view. The reason that pervaded by Purusha is related to the universe presenting itself to our view is because Purusha is the principle of consciousness, the omnipresent principle of consciousness. The reason that the universe presents itself to our view when pervaded by Purusha is that Purusha is the viewness. It is the principle of awareness that causes the universe to be aware of itself. This all-pervading Purusha accepted of his own free will the unmanifest divine Prakriti, consisting of the three gunas, that sought him in her playful mood. Abiding in Prakriti, the Purusha fell a prey to her charms, that obscure knowledge, and forgot himself the moment he saw her evolving through her gunas, progeny of various kinds with forms conforming to either of the three gunas, or of course combinations thereof. By identifying himself with Prakriti, who is other than himself, the Purusha attributes the doership of actions which are being performed by the gunas of Prakriti to himself. It is this feeling of doership which binds him to actions, although he is a mere witness and therefore a non-doer. That right there is the secret of karma yoga and why karma yoga works. That it is not the performance of an action that binds you to the reaction. It is the feeling that you are the one doing the action. That is why, to the extent that you can surrender attachment to the fruits of actions, it helps to work yourself free from the idea that you are the doer. And an action performed without the consciousness taking credit for it does not yield karma. That's the essential mechanism of karma yoga. And it is this bondage through action which makes him helpless in the matter of pleasurable and painful experiences, although he is independent in reality. And this bondage subjects him to repeated births and deaths, even though he is blissful by nature. The knowers of truth recognize Prakriti as responsible for the identification of the soul with body, with the senses and mind, as well as with the agents, the devas presiding over the senses, etc. As for the experience of pleasure and pain, they hold the Purusha identifying himself with Prakriti to be responsible, although he is beyond Prakriti. Devahuti said, "Kindly also tell me, O Supreme Person, the characteristics of Prakriti and Purusha, the two causes of this universe, which, in its gross and subtle forms, is nothing but a manifestation of these." The Lord resumed, "The wise speak of pradhana, or primordial matter, as Prakriti. Pradhana, it does mean primordial matter, but it also means primordial energy. Matter and energy both are Prakriti. The pradhana, which consists of the three gunas, nay, which is unmanifest and eternal, and exists both as cause and effect, and which, though undifferentiated in its causal state, is the source of distinct categories in its effect state. The aggregate of 24 categories, meaning the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal senses, the 5 external senses, or the 5 senses that perceive external things, and the 5 organs of action. The aggregate of those 24 is known to be an evolute of the pradhana. The gross elements are only 5, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The number of the subtle elements, too, is, in my opinion, just the same. They are smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. Interesting that he there qualifies that with, in my opinion. The indriyas are 10 in number. The auditory sense, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of taste, the olfactory sense, which is smell, the organ of speech, the hands, the feet, the organ of generation, meaning the reproductive organs, and the organ of defecation, which is said to be the 10th. The internal sense, I suspect organ of defecation is kind of a shorthand for the organs of elimination. The internal sense is seen to have 4 aspects in the shape of mind, understanding, ego, and reason. Their distinction lies in their functions, which represent their characteristics. The disposition of the conditioned Brahma has been recognized as consisting of the 24 principles just enumerated by me, and no other. Kala, or time, being the 25th. And earlier that was called the evolute of the first 24, because the definition of time is, as the others interact with each other, they kind of comprise the course of time, if you watch the course of their interactions. Some people speak of Kala as a potency of the Purusha, which causes fear to the doer who has come to associate himself with Prakriti and is deluded by egotism, since, of course, whatever form the doer has taken, it will come to an end, and thus it can fear for that end, or fear to lose whatever it has. That's why time causes fear. As a matter of fact, O daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, the Lord himself, who activates Prakriti, which is only another name for the equilibrium of the three gunas, Prakriti in its causal state is the gunas in equilibrium. Prakriti in its effectual state is the gunas whose equilibrium has been disturbed, and that causes an infinitude of different manifestations to arise from different combinations and different interactions of them, and which, in that equilibriate state, admits of no particular name or form, is designated as Kala. In this way, the Lord himself, who by his own Maya abides unaffected within all living beings as the Purusha, and outside them as Kala. When the Supreme Person placed his energy in his own Chit Shakti, or the power of intelligence, in his own Maya, the source of all created beings, the equilibrium of whose gunas had been disturbed by the destiny of the various jivas. So that's very interesting, saying here that what originally disturbs the gunas is the stored up karmas of the jivas from the previous cycle, so that when a cycle is closed and withdrawn back into the Lord, then at the start of the next kalpa, when the cycle is started again, it's like there's tension inside the jivas from their actions that have not yet resolved. It's like there's like a bunch of like stretched out rubber bands kind of karmas that they performed in a previous kalpa that haven't been resolved yet. And that tension is what pulls the gunas out of equilibrium and starts the universe manifesting again. The Maya gave birth to the Mahat-tattva, the principle of cosmic intelligence, which is full of light. The Mahat-tattva, which knew no languor or distraction, etc. In other words, it was very pure, efficient consciousness, and represented the shoot of the tree of the universe, drank off by its own effulgence the thick gloom prevailing at the time of universal dissolution, which had once swallowed the Mahat-tattva, in order to manifest the universe, which lay in it in a subtle form. Chitta, the faculty of reason, which abounds in the quality of sattva, is pure and free from passion and is the place where one can realize God. It is spoken of as the Mahat-tattva and is also called by the name of Vasudeva. Just as water in its natural state, before it's coming in contact with earth, etc., is clear, sweet, and unruffled, pure water, even so transparency, freedom from languor and distraction, etc., and serenity are predicated of chitta as its characteristic traits, pure reason, taken as philosophically in isolation, out of contact with other aspects of consciousness. From the Mahat-tattva, evolved from the Lord's own energy in the form of Chit Shakti, as it underwent transformation, sprang up Ahankara, the ego or the I-ness, which is predominantly endowed with active power and is of three kinds: Sattvika, Rajasika, and Tamasika. From these three types of Ahankara were severally evolved the mind, the Indriyas, and the gross elements. This Ahankara, the source of the gross elements, the Indriyas, and the mind, and hence identical with them, because it is the cause which reproduces itself as the effect, is the same as the Purusha called Sankarshana, the second of the four forms of the Lord, of this particular set of four forms of the Lord. The first one was Vasudeva, the second is Sankarshana, whom the Vaishnavas speak of as no other than Lord Ananta with 1,000 heads, the 1,000-headed serpent, Ananta Sheshanaga. The Ahankara is characterized as a doer when conceived in the form of the deities presiding over the Indriyas in the mind, an instrument in the form of the Indriyas, and an effect in the form of the gross elements. It is further characterized as serene, active, or dull, according as it is Sattvika, Rajasika, or Tamasika. From the Vaikarika type of Ahankara, that's a term for the Sattvika Ahankarika, the Vaikarika Ahankara, As it underwent transformation, was evolved the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. It is mind which is known by the name of Lord Aniruddha, another form of the Lord, the supreme ruler of the Indriyas, who is possessed of a form swarthy as the blue lotus growing in autumn, and who is slowly won by the yogis. The blue lotus is one of the traditional descriptions for the skin color of Vishnu and his avatars like Krishna, etc. The blue lotus or the blue monsoon clouds, that's what like the name Ghanashyama means or so on. If you like, you can just like Google image blue lotuses and you'll see the color that it's talking about. It's very beautiful. It's a little darker than most art portrays Krishna. It's a very deep blue. And Sunil, yes, kalpa is not the same as yuga. There are many, many yugas in a kalpa. A kalpa is 1,000 rounds of the 4 yugas. Let's see here. So that was from the evolution of the Vaikarika Ahankara. From the Rajasika ego, as it underwent transformation, sprang up the principle of buddhi, or understanding, O virtuous lady. Since, of course, he's saying this to Devahuti. Ascertaining the nature of objects on their coming to view and helping the senses in their work of perceiving objects. These are the functions of buddhi. So essentially, the Vaikarika causes the mind, the Rajasika causes like analysis, not just perceiving objects, but ascertaining their nature, thinking about them, understanding them, categorizing them. It's because in Rajoguna is the principle of activity. It's not, Rajoguna is never content to just see something. It has to then engage with it, do something with it. So in the mental state, to think about it, to engage the mind in interacting with it and poking at it and systematizing things. And the functions of buddhi, this is known by the name of pradyumna, the 3rd form of the Lord. We named them out of order. We named them 1st, 2nd, 4th, 3rd. But in their normal order, it does go with pradyumna as the 3rd before Aniruddha. Doubt, misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, and sleep are said to be the distinct characteristics of buddhi as determined by their functions. There's a footnote here saying that Maharshi Patanjali agrees, gives the same 5 functions of buddhi in his Yoga Sutra. The senses of perception as well as the organs of action, both types of indriyas too, are evolutes of the taijasa, which is called, or the rajasika. Taijasa meaning possessed of tejas, possessed of like fiery energy, essentially, is tejas. Shining, fiery, hot, active energy. The rajasika ego alone. Since the power of action belongs to prana and the power of perception inheres in buddhi, and both of these, prana and buddhi, are evolutes of the taijasa ego. From the tamasika ego, as it underwent transformation, impelled by the Lord's chit shakti, sprang up the principle of sound. And from the latter was evolved ether, and the auditory sense too, which catches sound. This because even these things, sound and ether, while they may seem very unmanifest and very ethereal, they're actually far more concrete than anything else we've been talking about so far, which is pure consciousness. So the principle of tamas, which is always the densest and most material of the gunas, evolves dense material elements and matter, starting with the very finest, starting with ether and sound. But compared to where those evolved from, they are a fundamental step toward the direction of concrete, solid density. The knowers of truth define sound as that which conveys the idea of an object, indicates the presence of a speaker screen from view, and constitutes the subtle form of ether. Even so, ether is characterized, ether, of course, we're translating akasha, is characterized as that which affords room to living beings, gives rise to the notions of inside and outside, and is the abode of prana, the indriyas, and the mind. From ether, which is an evolute of the principle of sound as it underwent transformation under the impulse of time, sprang up the principle of touch, and thence the air, as well as the tactile sense by which we perceive touch. Softness and hardness, and even so cold and heat, are the distinguishing attributes of touch, and it is further characterized as the subtle form of air. Even so, shaking, bringing together, having access everywhere, bearing particles of substances containing smell, etc., to the olfactory and other senses, and sound to the auditory sense, and giving strength and vitality to all the indriyas, these are the characteristic functions of air. So here it is very clear that while sound is very related to ether, the ability for sound to reach the auditory sense does indeed require air, as we know scientifically that it does. From air, which is a product of the principle of touch, impelled by the destiny of the various jivas, was evolved the principle of color, and thence fire, as well as the sense of sight, which enables us to perceive color. To appear in the same form as the material substance in which it inheres, to depend on the substance, to have, so appear in the same form as the substance, meaning that that color takes the same shape as that of which it is the color. This seems obvious, like, yeah, I think that's fairly obvious what that means. To depend on the substance, like the color of a thing does not exist separately from the thing. To have the same spatial relation as the substance and to constitute the essential nature of fire. These, O virtuous lady, are the functions of the principle of color. To give light, to cook and digest food, to destroy cold, to dry, to give rise to hunger and thirst, and to drink and eat through them. These are the functions of fire. From fire, which is an evolute of the principle of color, impelled by the destiny of the various jivas, proceeded the principle of taste, and thence water, as well as the sense of taste, which enables us to perceive taste. Taste, though one, becomes manifold, as astringent, sweet, bitter, pungent, sour, and salt, due to contact with other substances. So this is a very curious teaching here, that the primal flavor is sweet, and that all the other flavors are variations on sweetness, essentially. Even so, to wet substances, to bring about to wet substances, to make them wet, to bring about cohesion, to cause satisfaction, to maintain life, to refresh by slaking thirst, to soften things, to drive away heat, and to be in a state of incessant supply. These are the functions of water. From water, which is an evolute of the principle of taste, impelled by the destiny of the various jivas, proceeded the principle of smell, and thence earth, as well as the olfactory sense, which enables us to perceive odor alone. Smell, though one, becomes many, as mixed, offensive, fragrant, mild, strong, acid, and so on, according to the proportion of connected substances. Even so, to give form to the concept of Brahman, to remain in position, to hold, to limit, and to manifest the bodies as well as the distinctive qualities of all living beings, these are the characteristic functions of earth. The sense whose object of perception is sound is called the auditory sense, and that whose object of perception is touch is known as the tactile sense. Even so, the sense whose object of perception is color is spoken of as the sense of sight. Again, that whose object of perception is taste is known as the sense of taste, and that whose object of perception is odor is called the olfactory sense. Since a cause exists in its effect as well, the characteristics of the former are observed in the latter. That is why the peculiarities of all the elements are found to exist in earth alone. So in other words, ether, the principles, the characteristics of ether are in all the other elements, but not vice versa. The characteristics of ether are in air, but not the characteristics of the other elements. ethers, the characteristics of ether and of air are present in fire, and so on. When the Mahat Tattva, the ego, and the 5 gross elements, these 7 stood disunited, Lord Narayana, the cause of the universe, entered them, taking with him time, the destiny of the various jivas, and the gunas. From these 7 principles, roused into activity and united by the presence of the Lord, arose an unintelligent egg, from which appeared the well-known cosmic being. This egg, which is known by the name of Vishesha, or more often Hiranyagarbha, but also Vishesha, is enveloped on all sides by belts of fire, water, air, ether, the ego, and the Mahatattva, each 10 times larger than that which it encloses, and these 6 being enveloped by the outermost belt of Pradhana, pure primordial matter. All the 14 worlds, which are a manifestation of Sri Hari himself, are spread within this egg. Shaking off an attitude of indifference to that shining egg, which lay on the causal waters, the cosmic being presided over it and manifested the seats of the various indriyas out of it. First of all appeared in him a mouth, and thence came forth the organ of speech, and along with it the god of fire, the deity presiding over the organ of speech. Then appeared a pair of nostrils, and in them the olfactory sense along with prana. In the wake of the olfactory sense came the wind god, Vayudeva, presiding over that sense. And thereafter a pair of eyes, and in them the sense of sight. So there's a footnote here pointing something out here, that obviously we've been given this description several times in the Bhagavatam, because different teachers make reference to it, the evolution of the cosmic body. Earlier, when this was described within the context of Brahma's creation, it was the Ashvini Kumara Devas who were said to preside over the olfactory sense. Here Vayudeva is given. The difference is that in the body of the cosmic being, it is Vayudeva who presides over the olfactory sense, but within the creation of Brahma, the 14 loka systems, the presiding devas of the olfactory sense are the Ashvins. So the systems are otherwise closely the same, but they do differ in that way. Sunil, yes, 14 worlds, 14 lokas. This was talked about earlier in the Bhagavatam in a few places. It's the system of lokas that goes through the 7 talas, counting down Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, Patala lokas. Bhuloka, where we are, and counting up Bhuvarloka, Svargaloka, Maharloka, etc. Yeah, you know this system. Yeah, that's the 14 worlds that we're referring to here. So there appeared in the Lord a pair of eyes, and in the sense of sight. In the wake of this sense came the sun god, Surya Deva, the god presiding over the same. And next appeared in him a pair of ears, and in them the auditory sense, and in the wake of it the Dig Devatas, which are the deities who preside over the auditory sense. Then appeared in the cosmic being the skin, and thereon the hair, a pair of mustaches, and a beard. In the wake of these came the herbs and annual plants, meaning the devas, actually mostly devis thereof, who are the presiding devatas of the hair. Then appeared in him an organ of generation, in the meaning sexual organs. In the latter appeared the faculty of procreation, and thereafter the god presiding over the waters, Varuna Deva. Next appeared in him an anus, and in the wake of it the organ of defecation, and thereafter came the god of death, the terror of the world, Yamadeva. Then sprouted the presiding deity of elimination. Then sprouted forth in him a pair of hands, and in them the capacity of grasping and dropping things, and thereafter came the god Indra, the deva presiding over the hands. Next shot forth in him a pair of feet, and in them appeared the power of locomotion, and thereafter appeared Lord Vishnu, who is the deity who presides over that power, the power of locomotion. Next appeared in him the blood vessels, and thereafter came forth blood. In the wake of it came the river devas. The river devas and devis are the presiding deities of the blood and the circulatory system. And then appeared an abdomen. Next grew therein a feeling of hunger and thirst, and in their wake came the ocean, the deity presiding over the abdomen, Samudra Deva. It's an aspect of Varuna, but they are sometimes named separately. Then appeared in him a heart, and in the wake of the heart, a mind. After the mind appeared the moon, Soma Deva, the deity presiding over the mind, as well as Buddhi, the faculty of understanding. And in the wake of Buddhi came Brahma, the lord of speech and the deity presiding over Buddhi. Next appeared in him the ego, and thereafter Lord Rudra, the deity presiding over the ego. And last of all appeared in him Chitta, the reason, and then the Kshetrajna, the inner controller, which is itself the deity who presides over the reason. When all the aforesaid deities, with the exception of the Kshetrajna, though active, were unable to rouse the cosmic being into activity, he was still sleeping on the primordial waters, they re-entered each his own seat in order to rouse him one by one. The god of fire entered his mouth along with the organ of speech, but the cosmic being could not be roused even then. The wind god entered his nostrils along with the olfactory sense, but the cosmic being refused to wake up even then. The sun god entered his eyes along with the sense of sight, but the cosmic being failed to get up even then. The Dig Devatas entered his ears along with the auditory sense, but the cosmic being could not be stirred into activity even then. The herbs and annual plants entered the skin along with the hairs on the body, but the cosmic being refused to get up even then. The god presiding over the waters entered his organ of generation along with the faculty of procreation, but the cosmic being would not rise even then. The god of death entered his anus along with the organ of defecation, but the cosmic being could not be spurred into activity even then. The god Indra entered the hands along with their power, but the cosmic being would not get up even then. Lord Vishnu entered his feet along with the faculty of locomotion, but the cosmic being refused to stand up even then. The rivers entered his blood vessels along with blood, but the cosmic being could not be made to stir even then. The ocean entered his abdomen along with hunger and thirst, but the cosmic being refused to rise even then. The moon god entered the heart along with the mind, but the cosmic being would not be roused yet. Brahma too entered the heart along with reason, but even then the cosmic being could not be prevailed upon to get up. Lord Rudra also entered the heart along with the ego, but even then the cosmic being could not be made to rise. When, however, the inner controller, the Kshetrajna, the deity presiding over Chitta, entered the heart along with reason, that very moment the cosmic being rose from the causal waters. Even as prana, the indriyas, the mind, as well as the understanding, are unable to awaken an embodied soul who is fast asleep by their own power, without the presence of the inner controller, similarly they could not do so in the case of the cosmic being. Therefore, through devotion, dispassion, and spiritual wisdom acquired through a concentrated mind, one should contemplate on that inner controller, the Kshetrajna, as present in this very body, though apart from it. Thus ends the 26th discourse, forming part of the teaching of Lord Kapila on the nature of the fundamental principles, in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. I think we should do at least this next one since it's quite short. Discourse 27, How to Attain Liberation Through the Differentiation of Matter and Spirit. The Lord continued. Just as the sun, though seen reflected in water, remains unaffected by the attributes of water, such as the sun does not become coolness, does not waver with the reflection, and so on. So the spirit, the sun, the sun itself, the real sun doesn't. So the spirit, though abiding in a material body, remains unaffected by its pleasurable and painful experiences, being devoid of attributes and doership, and therefore free from change. When, however, he gets attached to the gunas of Prakriti, he begins to look upon himself as a doer, being completely deluded by egotism. Due to this sense of doership, he loses his peace of mind through evils attaching to action, and brought about by association with matter, and helplessly thrown into wombs of good, evil, and mixed types, has to undergo repeated births and deaths. Just as a dreaming man experiences sorrow even though there is no real cause for it, Even so, for the man who dwells on the objects of senses, the round of births and deaths does not cease, even though those objects do not exist in reality. Therefore, through concentrated practice of devotion as well as through dispassion, one should gradually bring under control one's mind, addicted to the pursuit of sense objects. Practicing concentration of mind through yama and other paths of yoga with reverence, he who has realized the self by means of sincere devotion to me, and by listening to my stories, by even-mindedness towards all beings and absence of enmity or attachment to any, by practicing continence and observing a vow of silence, and by devotion to one's own duty in a spirit, or one's svadharma, in a spirit of dedication to God, who remains contented with whatever is got by chance, and takes food in a measured quantity, is ever given to contemplation, lives in seclusion, and is calm and composed, friendly, compassionate and self-possessed, nay, by virtue of wisdom acquired through the perception of reality of both matter and spirit, he who ceases to identify himself with his body and to regard those connected with it as his own, who transcends the three states of consciousness, meaning waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and therefore no longer sees anything else than God. Such a man is able to perceive his true self with his purified intellect, even as one sees the sun with his eyes, and attains to that Brahman who is one without a second, who is free from all adjuncts, who shines as the only reality through the false ego, who is the foundation of Prakriti, who reveals the Mahatattva and other evolutes and interpenetrates everything, both cause and effect. Just as a reflection of the sun in water is discovered with the help of a reflection of that reflection on the wall of a house. Like if you have a container of water in your house and you notice a spot of light shining on the wall and you try to figure out where it's coming from and you figure out that it's shining off of the water. Even so, the threefold ego is revealed through its reflections on the body, the indriyas, and the mind. And through the ego, which contains a reflection of the spirit, is seen God, who is possessed of true wisdom, is absolutely free from egotism and keeps awake even when the subtle elements, the indriyas, the mind, and the intellect, etc., get merged in the unmanifest on account of sleep. Although the existence of the self can be vividly felt as the seer, he falsely takes himself as lost, though not lost, because of the disappearance of the ego during the state of deep sleep, just as a man who has lost his fortune feels distressed and takes himself as lost, even though he has only lost access to certain material objects. Pondering thus, a man of understanding realizes his own self, who is the substratum and revealer of all fundamental principles, including the ego. Devahuti said, "Matter, O divine sage, can never leave the spirit, the two being interdependent and co-eternal, O Lord. Just as odor and earth, and taste and water can never exist apart, so can buddhi and the spirit never remain disassociated from each other. Hence, how can there be any freedom for the soul so long as the gunas of prakriti continue to exist, gunas that bind the soul, who is a non-doer, to actions? Even if the great fear of such bondage is averted through an inquiry into the fundamental principles in any particular case, the same may appear again since the cause of it has not ceased." So I think that's fairly clear. She's basically saying, just realizing that this is how it works doesn't mean that I'm not still here in a body having experiences, even if through your explanation I cease to fear the unreality of Maya. I might come to fear it again because I'm still here in a body and something I could undergo suffering. So how does just this knowledge actually lead to experiential release? The Lord replied, "Assailed day and night by intense devotion to me, developed by hearing my stories for a long time, with a heart purified by doing one's duties in a disinterested spirit," meaning unattached to the fruits, by spiritual enlightenment which enables one to perceive the truth, by strong dispassion, by practice of meditation accompanied by sacred vows and religious observances, and by thorough concentration of mind, prakriti, which binds the soul, gradually withdraws, even as the wooden stick used for kindling the sacred fire by attrition is consumed by the very fire it produces. So this refers to starting a fire with friction, with called a bow drill. You spin, well, there's a stick with a hole in it and a stick you put into the hole and spin it between your palms. And with friction, it starts a fire. And that fire can burn the stick. So by essentially that you wear away the ignorant mechanism of the consciousness by applying it through devotion and yoga and so on. Ever recognized to be a source of evil and abandoned after enjoyment, she no longer does any harm to the soul, prakriti. Prakriti, the manifest world, no longer does harm to the soul, who stands supreme in his glory and is now absolutely independent. Just as the dream of a sleeping man is fraught with many evils, but the same does not conduce to his infatuation once he is awake, so Prakriti can never do any harm to him who, having realized the truth, ever keeps his mind fixed on me and who delights in his own self. When a man who is given to contemplation remains absorbed in the self for a period extending over many births, he develops a distaste for everything as far as Brahmaloka. Even Brahmaloka is something he doesn't care about. Having realized the self by my abundant grace, that strong-minded devotee of mine has all his doubts resolved by self-vision, and when freed from his astral body, from his sukshma sharira, easily attains in that very life the supremely blissful state known by the name of final beatitude, moksha, which is his essential character and rests on me, and having attained which a yogi never returns to birth and death. If the mind of the accomplished yogi, O beloved mother, does not get attached to the siddhis, the superhuman powers, developed through yoga, which is the only means of acquiring them, he is sure to attain my immortal state, where death has no power. Thus ends the 27th discourse forming part of the story of Lord Kapila in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. We could stop there. It's 10:10 Central Time. I could do one more. The next one's on Ashtanga Yoga. What are you guys? You guys want to stop there? This has been kind of dense philosophy, going through a kind of a quick crash course on Sankhya philosophy, so it's kind of dense material here. We could go through the next thing is an overview of Ashtanga Yoga.
Maybe we can ask questions or.
Sure, we can stop with the reading.
We can ask what they want, the others want.
Sure, yeah. What would you guys like? I'm happy to do one more discourse. The next one's not super long.
Yeah. There are any questions, beautiful people? No questions. So I guess you can read, no?
Okay, I'll do one more. If anyone needs to go, that's fine. The recording will be up soon. And
yeah. Thank you.
All right, I'll do one more discourse. And then we probably should stop for the day. Discourse 28, the process of the eightfold yoga, Ashtanga Yoga. The Lord continued, I shall tell you, O princess. They're calling her princess because remember, she's the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, so she is literally a princess. The character of yoga with some object to rest upon, by practicing which, and in no other way, the mind gets purified and takes to the path of God. To do one's allotted duty to the best of one's ability and to shrink from prohibited acts, to remain contented with whatever is got as a dispensation of providence, to adore the feet of one who has realized the self and to cease from duties, in other words, like of one's guru, who is one who has realized the self, and to cease from duties connected with the pursuit of religious merit, worldly possessions, and sensuous enjoyment. So even to cease from duties connected with the pursuit of punyam, as part of this here. Even so, to take delight in duties tending to final beatitude, to take pure food in a measured quantity, to dwell permanently in a place which is not only secluded, but also free from molestation, meaning people aren't going to be bothering you there, to practice non-violence, to speak the truth, to abstain from thieving, to limit one's possessions to the extent of one's barest needs, to abstain from sexual commerce, to practice austere penance, to observe purity, to study the Vedas and other sacred texts, to worship the deity, to observe silence, to acquire steadiness by firmness in the very best postures, meaning in asanas, to control one's breath by slow degrees through pranayama, to withdraw one's senses from their objects and direct them towards the heart with the help of the mind, to fix one's mind as well as the vital air on any mystical circle in one's body, meaning on any one of the chakras, to contemplate without break on the pastimes of Lord Vishnu and thereby to compose one's mind. By these and other such methods, like observing fasts, bestowing gifts, and so on, one should diligently control one's breath and then gradually curb one's wicked mind addicted to evil ways with the help of one's reason and apply it to contemplation on God. Pure food, Sunil, it talks in greater detail about it elsewhere, but it's here referring to sattvic food. Ayurveda goes into great detail about purity of food. Having controlled one's posture, one should spread a seat consisting of kusha grass, deer skin, and so on in an undefiled spot. And sitting there in an easy posture, keeping the body erect, one should practice control of breath, pranayama. The striver should clear the passage of the breath by first inhaling the air to his utmost capacity, then holding the breath, and finally exhaling it, or by reversing the process. In other words, by blowing out all of your breath, pausing for a while, and then inhaling it, so that the mind may become steady and free from distraction. That's just one basic pranayama method to start getting breath control and kind of settle the mind. There's a lot of other pranayamas, hundreds of them actually. Even as gold throws off its dross when heated by the force of air and fire, meaning like you can smelt gold of its impurities by heating it up. So the mind of the striver who has controlled his breath gets purified before long. A striver should eradicate the disorders of the three humors of the body, the three doshas, vata, pitta, and we often say kapha, but in Sanskrit, kapha, with a hard pa. By the processes of breath control, his sins by concentrating his mind, contacts with sense objects by withdrawing the senses from their objects. That's why you do this in a secluded place. And the characteristics which are contrary to the Lord's divine nature by means of meditation. When his mind gets purified and concentrated by the practice of yoga, he should meditate on the form of the Lord with his gaze fixed on the tip of his nose. The tip of the nose thing is interesting. A lot of yogis in India, you will see like literally meditating with their eyes open and cross-eyed like this. But some gurus have referred to it being the wrong tip of the nose, that they're taught that they assume it means this tip, but it means this end, the root of the nose between the eyebrows, referring to the Agnya chakra. So different gurus have different reads on the tip of the nose, fixing the gaze on the tip of the nose thing. The Lord has a cheerful lotus-like countenance, eyes ruddy like the interior of a lotus, and a body swarthy like the petals of a blue lotus. Again, I do recommend that you guys just Google image blue lotus if you haven't. I mean, you may know and have blue lotuses and know what they look like, but it's a really beautiful color, and it's one of the consistent traditional descriptions of the skin color of Vishnu and of Krishna and many other of his forms. And bearing a conch, discus, and mace in 3 of his 4 hands. So this is describing the form of the Lord that you should meditate on in Kapila's teaching. He has wrapped round his loins a shining piece of silk yellow as the filaments of a lotus, bears the mark of Srivatsa on his bosom, and has the brilliant Kaustubha gem suspended from his neck. He also wears round his neck a garland of sylvan flowers that has attracted a swarm of bees, drunk with its delicious fragrance and sweetly humming about it, and is further adorned with a pearl necklace and a crown, and pairs of armlets, wristlets, and anklets, all superb. With his loins and hips graced by a girdle, he stands on the lotus of his devotee's heart. So that's where you should picture him, standing on your heart, inside of you. Is most charming to look at, wears a serene aspect and gladdens the soul and eyes of those who behold him. Eternally continuing in the prime of youth, he has a captivating appearance, is ever greeted by the entire universe, and is impatient to show his grace to his servants. In other words, he's very eager. He's like looking for reasons to show you his grace. His glory is worth singing and sanctifies all. May he confer his glory even on men of sacred renown, like the demon king Bali. In this way, one should meditate on the integral form of the Lord till the mind does not shake. The pastimes of the Lord are all attractive to the sight. Hence, with a mind full of sincere devotion, one should visualize him as standing, moving, sitting, lying, or dwelling in one's heart. Having ascertained that his mind, though fixed on the aforementioned form of the Lord, only takes a collective view of all his limbs, the practicant should fix it on each individual limb of the Lord. So in other words, if you just try to picture all that, maybe you'll picture something, but it'll be a little bit vague. You're not going to have like this high resolution, crystal clear image in your inner eye. So practice on a little bit at a time and build up the clarity of your visualization. The devotee should concentrate his thought on the Lord's lotus feet, adorned with the marks of a thunderbolt, a goad, a banner, and a lotus, the splendor of whose prominent, ruddy, and brilliant nails, resembling the orb of the moon, dispels the thick gloom of one's heart. The blessed Lord Shiva became all the more blessed by bearing on his head the holy waters of the Ganga, which has its source in the water that washed the Lord's lotus feet. Again, his feet are like a thunderbolt hurled to shatter the mountain of sins stored in the mind of the devotee meditating upon them. One should meditate on these, the feet, for a long time. Then the devotee should impress on his heart the knees, as well as the shanks, meaning the shins and calves, everything from the feet up to the knees, of the birthless Lord, which are fondled by Lakshmi, the lotus-eyed mother of Brahma, the maker of the universe, and the adored of the gods, with her shining sprout-like hands, placing his knees on her thighs. Next, he should fix his mind on the Lord's thighs, the storehouse of energy, that possess the luster of the linseed flower, again, a beautiful blue color, slightly lighter than the rest of his body, as if the parts of his body are slightly lighter or darker blue, like there's a slight gradient, and appear most graceful when borne on the shoulders of Garuda, when he's got his thighs straddling the shoulders of Garuda, his bird mount. Similarly, he should contemplate on the Lord's rounded hips, encircled by a girdle resting on the exquisite yellow silk that covers his hips and extends up to his ankles. Now he should meditate on the Lord's pool-like navel at the center of his belly, the abode of the entire system of the worlds, from which sprang the lotus, representing all the spheres and forming the home of Brahma, the self-born. Likewise, he should concentrate his thought on the Lord's nipples, resembling a pair of most excellent emeralds, which look whitish on account of the rays of the milk-white pearl necklaces on his chest. So they are apparently green in color, but kind of have a white shine because there's these gleaming pearl necklaces right next to them. He should then fix his mind on the bosom of the Supreme Person, his chest, the abode of Goddess Mahalakshmi, which brings delight to the mind and eyes of men. He should also imprint on his mind an image of the neck of the Lord, who is adored by the whole universe, a neck which serves to enhance the beauty of the Kaustubha gem itself, rather than vice versa, because the neck is so handsome, I guess. He should further focus his thought on the Lord's four arms, the abode of the guardians of the various spheres, the ornaments on which were burnished by revolving Mount Mandara. He should also duly contemplate, well, that refers to a story that we'll get into later. He should also duly contemplate on the Lord's discus, the Sudarshana chakra, which spins. He spins on one finger, or sometimes he just holds it still in his hand, containing 1,000 spokes and possessing a dazzling luster, as well as on the conch, which looks like a swan in his lotus-like palm. He should then call to mind the Lord's beloved mace, known by the name of Kaumodaki, and besmeared with the clotted blood of enemy warriors. His garland, attended with the humming of a swarm of bees, and the gem adorning his neck and representing the pure essential character of the jivas. Next, he should rivet his thought on the lotus-like countenance of the Lord, who reveals his form in this world out of compassion for his devotees, a countenance which is distinguished by a prominent nose, and whose crystalline cheeks are irradiated by the oscillation of his glittering alligator-shaped earrings, technically crocodile-shaped. Um, so this, I'm sure everybody's seen this, but the wording was kind of fancy of how if an earring is that's like a multifaceted jewel is turning, it'll cast these like nets of light um, that kind of flash and sway on his cheeks. Adorned with curly tresses and possessed of lotus-like eyes, the Lord's face, which is further characterized by dancing eyebrows, puts to shame by its elegance a lotus swarming with bees with a pair of fish throbbing on it, the pair of throbbing fish being the eyebrows. With an alert mind, he should dwell on a conceptual image of the aforesaid countenance. With full devotion, he should contemplate for a long time in his heart on the glances, frequently cast out of compassion by the Lord's eyes, in order to soothe the most fearful threefold agony of his devotees, glances which are accompanied by loving smiles and are full of abundant grace. He should similarly meditate on the most benevolent smile of Lord Srihari, a smile which dries away the ocean of tears caused by intense grief of all those who bow to him, as well as meditate on his arched eyebrows, manifested by dint of his own Maya, in order to charm the god of love for the good of hermits. So in other words, to distract people who are trying to be celibate from being swayed by Kamadeva, Vishnu's eyebrows are so attractive that they attract Kamadeva and distract Kamadeva from distracting humans. Full of devotion steeped in love, he should finally fix his thought on the laughter of Lord Vishnu, visualized as abiding in the cavity of his heart, or like resonating in the cavity of the heart. A laughter which is so captivating that it can be easily meditated upon, because it is very kind of clinging to the mind. And in the course of which come to view the rows of his small teeth. He shows his teeth when he laughs, resembling jasmine buds, rendered rosy by the profuse splendor of his lips, as if his lips actually glow crimson a little bit and shine on his teeth. And having devoted his mind to the same, he should no more desire to see anything else. By following the above course of meditation, the devotee develops love for Srihari. His heart melts through devotion. The hair on his body stand erect through excessive joy, and he is constantly bathed in a stream of tears occasioned by intense love. These are the symptoms of, you know that you've really done it right when you react that intensely. So that he now gradually withdraws even the mind, which was being used by him as a means to attract Srihari. Even as the flame of a lamp is extinguished when the oil is burnt and the lamp broken, so the mind gets immediately dissolved the moment it is cut off from its moorings in the shape of the soul, and rid of passion, it ceases to think of anything. The adjuncts of the soul in the shape of body, etc., being withdrawn at this stage, the striver sees pervading everywhere the one absolute, having no distinction of subject, object, and so on. Having established himself in the glory of his own being, which transcends joy and sorrow, through the dissolution of his mind brought about by the practice of yoga and divorced from ignorance, the striver realizes the truth of the Supreme Self and discovers that pleasure and pain, as well as their experience, which he attributed till now to his own self, are actually attributable to the ego, which is a product of ignorance. That is what actually experiences pleasure and pain, not the self. Even as a man blinded by intoxication caused by spirituous liquor, meaning alcohol, sees not whether the cloth wrapped round his loins is still there or has dropped therefrom, so the enlightened soul who has attained this final stage no longer discerns whether the body is seated or has risen from its seat, whether it has shifted by the will of Providence or whether it has come back by the will of the same Providence, for he has realized his essential character. The body, too, which is subject to the will of Providence, survives along with the senses till the destiny which contributed to its existence has not been reaped. Yet the enlightened soul who has attained to the heights of yoga, culminating in samadhi, and realized the truth, no longer regards that body or those connected with it, his wife, his children, anybody, as his own, even as a man who is awake no longer thinks of the body seen in a dream as his own. Just as a man is realized as distinct from his son and possessions that are regarded by common people as their own self, they're so attached to their child, so attached to their possessions that they hardly feel like they're separate things. But on a little thought, you can realize that those are clearly distinctly separate things. So is the perceiving subject recognized as distinct from the body, senses, and other adjuncts, which are generally identified with one's own self. But it's easy to think, just by a little bit of introspective consideration, that the self that perceives, the consciousness itself, is clearly distinguishable from the body, clearly distinguishable from the physical senses, etc. Like anybody can prove this to themselves just given a few minutes of sitting quietly and paying attention to your own consciousness. This is not something that has to be taken on faith. Like anybody in 1 hour can prove that to themselves. Just as fire is distinct from a piece of burning wood, a spark, or even from the smoke arising from it, and just as fire is distinct from a torch, which is recognized as identical with it at a common glance, if you're not thinking philosophically about the nature of the torch and the fire. So the perceiving subject is distinct from the elements, the senses, and the internal sense. The all-pervading self, which is called Brahman, is distinct even from the perceiving subject, which is called Jiva, and the Lord is distinct from Prakriti. Distinct, not necessarily separate, but distinct. One should see the self as identical in all living beings, and all beings as identical in the self, even as all living beings are seen as identical in essence with the gross elements. Just as fire, though one, all fire is fire, appears as diversified in the media manifesting it, that fire there is clearly distinguishable from this fire over here, so the self, though one, appears different as abiding in the various material bodies due to the diverse characteristics of those bodies. Therefore, conquering this divine prakriti, which veils the true character and brings about the bondage of the jiva, a fragment of the Lord, nay, which appears both as cause and effect and is so difficult to comprehend, a devotee of the Lord realizes his true being. Thus ends the 28th discourse entitled The Pursuit of Disciplines for God Realization, forming part of the teachings of Lord Kapila, in Book 3 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita.
Thank you, Devana.
Thank you all.
Yeah. That was beautiful, quite.
Yeah, I really, this is really getting into the deep spiritual teachings here. I mean, we have been for a long time, but
I had to read it a couple of times to get it. So yeah.
I would suggest anyone, if you really want to get all of that, to go through it slowly a couple times and think about it, especially when it's describing the evolution of the categories and so on. Sankhya philosophy. I mean, people in Vedic society would spend like a year studying Sankhya philosophy, and we just went over the whole thing in an hour. So obviously, it's a lot packed in there.
And then Maharshi explains it beautifully how simple TM is, and then we are so grateful for his technique, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we're doing Maharshi Vedic science, and we have to compare everything, and
right.
That's where I thought Shrimad Bhagavatam was so beautiful. I mean,
yeah, it's the same philosophy. Maharshi taught that, yeah, because like his Maharshi's lineage passed down through like from Trotakacharya's lineage down through Krishnananda Saraswati to Brahmananda Saraswati and so on. They all studied Sankhya philosophy. It's the exact same set of teachings that were passed down.
And then the transcendental consciousness is actually that Satchit Anandan. So when you every time meditate, it expands to other levels, and you become, it just expands and expands. So that is
yeah, exactly.
Easily how Maharshi explained.
Yeah.
But you have to taste it, he says.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Any comments, beautiful people?
Well, yeah, on the note of Maharshi and Guru Dev teachings, it's interesting that we covered today reading it here, if the mind is of the accomplished yogi does not get attached to the cities.
Yeah. That's
Don't go into that, developed through yoga, which is the only means of acquiring them. He is sure to attain my immortal state.
yes,
Death has no power.
yes,
So it's a matter of like also in the spirit that we are in alignment, or the Maharshi's in alignment with the spirit of these teachings. But there's a crucial point there about something that Maharshi, gave to the world, the cities.
yes. The idea with the siddhis is that they're an indicator of progress on the path of yoga. That
Nice.
that the manifestation of the siddhis is said to kind of arise naturally, but that if you then go off and play with those, it's beside the point. And if you, to the extent that you spend your time off doing that, you have ceased to progress on the path of yoga. Like there's descriptions I've read of people, even recently, like one of the top, he's called Radhanath Swami, he's called, one of the top Hare Krishna guys, wrote an autobiography of his travels in India during the 70s and so on. And he said that up in the Himalayas, he saw Naga Babas meditating. And he said he just witnessed two of them levitate in meditation. And he just walked up to them, passed his hand underneath them, was just like freaking out about it. And afterward, they just like settled down, ended their meditation. Some other ones were sitting there who didn't levitate. None of them made a big deal about it. They all just got up and went on with their day. Just, like they were super advanced yogis whose the cities just kind of spring up like flowers blossoming, basically, from that degree of yoga. But they made no deal about it. They didn't go off and try to show it off. They didn't try to use it for anything. They just let it arise, recognized it as a sign that they're doing well, and didn't get further involved with it. That's kind of the approach.
I wonder if that's a core reason why we don't have people levitating in the Maharshi yogic flying sessions yet, where it's a little bit too public. The TM movement tries to make statistics and scientific claims all the time and publicize, and they would love to get a video of someone yogic flying if someone did yogic fly, but maybe they shouldn't be trying to get a video.
I think, Andy, it is can I comment on this?
Yeah,
I think the Siddhis Maharshi brought it because when you have a group, it showed science shows that the area has less crime. It just works, but we have to have a group. Also, we have just read that when you develop siddhis, it's not to show off, because it's like you're gonna drive a car, and while you drive, you have a car and you can bring someone to somewhere. So if someone needs a ride, you can help the person, right? And you move on. So the siddhis is like that. You can help people, but it's actually for you to go to God or higher stages of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So the coming back to the scientific points, I think the siddhis, when people do the TM technique and they meditate in a group, it has an impact. It impacts the society, the whole of the people. It's just scientific. I had to study this. That's why I'm so excited about it as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And there's descriptions, and we've already come across a bunch of mentions of, particularly when it talks about various celestial beings, the devas, the vidyadharas, the gandharvas. It'll often include the siddhas, who are, there's a whole worlds and like other world, like in other lokas, like civilizations of people who manifested siddhas and can fly and change their shape and all this stuff, who went off and did that and have totally slipped off the path of yoga, and who have basically become celestial entities like devas, and might go on for thousands of years like that, being, they don't become evil. They're good celestial beings. They're like devas, but it could delay them for thousands of years if they don't stop playing off there in their celestial gardens and go back and finish.
Well said. That's the whole point. It's you can gain some great siddhis. It's not to show off. As soon as you mix the ego in it, you go off the path. That's
exactly. And so that's how you have all these things.
And it's nice that the
often had
Bhagavatam
in temple.
explains it properly. So that's why it's a spotless Purana. I really like this book. It's like, thank you for reading. And I'm so grateful for all the gurus that do devotional work. Especially I'm grateful to Maharshi and Gurudev and his parampara. And of course, you guys, your gurus are also doing great work. So I'm grateful for everybody. The first Bhagavatam I read was from Prabhupada ji, so I'm also grateful for him. Because,
he did amazing work. He like so many millions of people are
80
practicing bhakti
language.
yoga who wouldn't have otherwise.
80 language his book is translated. I mean,
like tens and tens of millions of people all over the world are practicing bhakti yoga because of him. He did really great work.
But I felt it matches properly with Maharshi's work, and if you, the Satchitananda is actually transcendental consciousness. When you meditate regularly, and especially when you have a group, it just expands. So you can integrate that in your work, in your readings, and whatsoever in your life, daily life. So it has a great influence there.
Yeah.
Andy was saying something.
Oh no, I may have just said wow in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just share a little. Maybe you want to stop the recording.
Okay, sure.
But